It is the voice of Indiana County, WCCS, AM 1160 and 101.1 FM, and our conversation with Dr. Rachel Lance is brought to you by Marcus & Mack, a law firm representing injured people. And I'm very happy to say Dr. Rachel Lance, because when you wrote this book, In the Waves, My Quest to Solve the Mystery of a Civil War Submarine, you were not yet a doctor, were you, Rachel?
Well, when I wrote the book, I had finished my PhD. Mm-hmm. But yes, the book is about one of the major experiments and scientific endeavors that I used to get that degree, which, given this show's sponsor, seems really appropriate because it's an injury and trauma pattern.
Yeah, well, it really was, and it was just amazing to me the lengths that you have to go to as a scientist to follow up on theories and on postulations about what happened to this the submarine Hunley. We've heard of the Hunley, the Civil War submarine. We've heard of the mystery surrounding its disappearance after its one initial mission, and you got to the bottom of it. What got you there? What made you investigate this?
Well, I was a student in need of a project, and I'd been working on underwater blast trauma already. And I didn't really have the funding that I wanted to move that particular project forward, which is unfortunately just a thing that happens in science sometimes. You can want to research it all you want, but if you can't afford to buy the lab supplies, then you aren't necessarily going to be able to finish the research. Mm-hmm. This was a project that was originally suggested to me by a PhD advisor that we both thought was going to be just kind of a fun little interesting side piece of history that we worked on and figured out maybe, but at least contributed to. And it ended up just spiraling wildly out of control. So before I know it, I'm in this muddy farm pond, miles and miles from Durham, and I've got no electricity, and I'm just excavating pieces of old discharged bombs from the mud and stuff like that. So yeah, it got out of hand quickly.
Hey, people might be surprised to learn how far you have to go to disprove a possibility as well as to prove a theory that you might have. How frustrating is it to pursue theories that you don't really believe are going to pan out anyway?
Personally, I don't find that frustrating. I think that's a really important thing about science, and I think it's something that's very underappreciated. You never hear on the news scientists spent 6 months working very hard to disprove a theory. But it's actually one of the key building blocks of honestly and legitimately evaluating your own theory, is making sure that you're not putting on these blinders, making sure that you're not getting tunnel vision to the other possibilities out there. So once I was able to do that, once I evaluated these other two theories, and then I was able to pursue my own, I was able to do it with a little bit more confidence, knowing that I had truly given them a chance to be correct.
I need to reintroduce the book because I don't think I gave it the proper fanfare. The book is In the Waves, My Quest to Solve the Mystery of a Civil War Submarine. The Hunley was the submarine in question during the Civil War, and it's a very familiar story to a lot of people about how it, on its initial mission, disappeared and was never seen again until finally being discovered and brought to the surface. And then here along comes Rachel Lance, who almost becomes a victim of a modern-day experiment, as you were almost in a car wreck when you had a trunk full of explosives, weren't you?
Yeah, that wasn't a fun day. Thankfully, we dodged a serious catastrophe, but as somebody who studies injury and trauma, I'm also very aware of other people's driving habits. And so that was an incident where I'm very glad that I left appropriate following distance. But yes, we had a trunk full of black powder, and there was a large truck that was tailgating me very, very closely. And I was already wary of that and trying to increase my distance between the next car. But as that was happening, the cars in front of me got into a major wreck, and so I had to suddenly try to dodge them while not getting hit myself.
Well, I'm glad you're able to survive it and talk to us this morning. Now, as we think about it, we were mentioning theories that don't work out, and of course, I don't want to give away the theories that do, or the theory that did finally pan out as you solved this amazing mystery. But what were some of the theories that you were looking at, some of the postulations about what happened to the Hunley?
Well, the first one and the most important one that I wanted to evaluate was what people call the theory of suffocation. And not to be too nitpicky, but that's actually not the right word, because suffocation is really when you stop breathing or when you've only lost oxygen. And so that's actually a really big clue, because to me it means there aren't physiologists working on this problem, because they're using the wrong word, right? Mm-hmm. And so I kind of had to look at the amount of oxygen that was inside the submarine and how long they would have had with that amount of oxygen before they would have passed out. But also, the thing that a lot of people forget is you're exhaling carbon dioxide. So I also had to calculate how much carbon dioxide are people producing at the same time. So that's why the correct word is actually asphyxiation, is because you have a combination of potential low oxygen and potential high carbon dioxide. And that one was really important because, in theory, these guys could have just stayed down too long. They didn't have a great way to refresh their air supply. But thankfully, based on the math, I was able to conclude that they would have definitely noticed the symptoms of carbon dioxide, which is very, very uncomfortable, quite some time before they would have passed out from lack of oxygen.
That gives us a great idea of how a scientist approaches a problem like that. Now, you mentioned that particular theory. Describe how the behavior of the crew, or the lack of behavior of the crew in this case, helped you to break this down.
Well, as I mentioned, carbon dioxide can be really uncomfortable. I've experienced it. It's not something I ever want to do again. It hurts. You're breathing super hard. You're panting for air. You have this piercing, just shredding migraine. It's extremely unpleasant. And the crew was seated at their station. So each person was not only completely free of any kind of skeletal trauma, but they were all just hanging out. They were at their crank spots. And the pilot of the boat, Lieutenant George Dixon, was even so much as just sitting on his own private bench. His bones were locked in place, showing that he had just stayed on his bench and slumped over. Now, this guy is immediately below the front conning tower. He can literally stand up and poke his head out into fresh air. So if they had a bare minimum of at least 10 minutes, according to my math, of warning time before they would have been in pain from carbon dioxide, but before they lost consciousness, why didn't he just stand up? This thing approached on the surface. We know for a fact it approached on the surface because the witnesses from the enemy ship, the Housatonic, all testified to that.
Rachel Lance is our guest. The book is In the Waves, My Quest to Solve the Mystery of a Civil War Submarine. Again, Rachel, I'm trying my hardest not to spoil the surprise for anyone who wants to read this, but one of the great things about the book, and I told you before, the writing is just terrific. You're a very funny writer, and in addition to being a very, very scientifically oriented writer, but you actually you find that pond that you mentioned, and you get yourself permission to go out and conduct some tests with your very own sub.
Yes, and thank you. I'm glad you liked the book. But yes, that's accurate. Basically, the key to this project was just the charity of other history buffs. So the pond was owned by a very kindly farmer who was also a huge history buff, and he was just very generous, and he let me come onto his property and do this experiment.
Yeah, it's absolutely wonderful the way that you describe it. Tell me about the Hunley itself and why it not only captures our imagination even today, but why it has significance in the evolution of submarine warfare.
Ooh, good question. Okay, so the Hunley itself was a bit homemade, and that really reflects the nature of the Civil War. So it's a 40-foot submarine, which is pretty small, and it was hammered together out of the recycled iron plates from the boiler of a steamship. And inside, there were 8 crewmen. One of them was the pilot, and so he was responsible for steering and all of that. And then the other 7 were positioned along a crank. So this hand crank was connected via gears to the propeller outside, and that was how it moved. Their main source of air would have been the 2 conning towers, so they just opened the hatches to refresh their oxygen supply. And on the front end, it had that spar. So it had the 16-foot spar, and that was how they delivered their bomb. The bomb was firmly attached to the end of the spar, and they just cranked their vessel up to the enemy ship, the USS Housatonic, and poked it into the side of the hull, which meant that they were also very close to it when it went off. the reason that this was really important for warfare is because at that time, both the Union and the Confederacy really looked down their noses on submarines. They called them infernal machines, and they meant that literally, like, these are machines from hell. Mm-hmm. And it was considered really unethical because ungentlemanly to sneak up on someone, but they were both building them. And what ended up happening was the Hunley proved that they were so useful that this could no longer really be ignored as a technology. So the next time you really see submarines come into play is World War I. Obviously, at that point, they're much more developed. So this has gradually become, because it all started with the Hunley, really, and her initial success, but from there, it sort of springboarded into a global method of warfare.
Just a minute left here with Rachel Lance. Rachel, what have people said to you about the book since it's come out?
Oh, well, it comes out officially today. So I'm very excited about that. Mm-hmm. But a lot of it's been really supportive, which is really nice. So I'm glad that people are enjoying it, and I'm glad that I could bring this story of what it's really like to do science and what it feels like to be involved in an experiment like this.
It makes science fun. It's called In the Waves, My Quest to Solve the Mystery of a Civil War Submarine, and Rachel Lance has been kind enough to spend some time with us. Rachel, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.